I'll simply click the icon within my computer system that will launch Visual Studio 2008. You should be aware that when you first launch Visual Studio 2008 that you have some choices to make. And for the purpose of this course, what we want to do is to make Microsoft Visual Basic 2008 our default product. Which means every time I launch Visual Studio 2008, it will in turn default to Visual Basic. As you can see, there are other products that are available within the Visual Studio environment, such as Visual C#, Visual C++, and so forth. You'll also notice that the version of the Microsoft .NET framework is version 3.5. That is the latest version that is compatible with Visual Studio 2008. Prior versions of Visual Studio, and therefore Visual Basic, use earlier versions of Microsoft .NET framework, and they are not necessarily backward compatible. So you want to be aware of that. Once you have selected Visual Basic 2008 as your default environment, to get started you can simply click on File and choose New Project, or you can click on Create Project from the Visual Studio 2008 interface. Either method will yield the same result, which is another dialog box which will ask you, what do you want to create? In this case, you want to check the left-hand quadrant, which will verify that you're in the Visual Basic environment. And for our purpose, we are creating a Windows application. You also want to choose the Windows Forms application under the Visual Studio Installed Templates section of the screen. You also notice that there is a .NET Framework 3.5 drop-down box where earlier versions of the .NET Framework could be selected. But again, we're going to be working exclusively in the .NET Framework version 3.5. From this new project screen, the other item that you will want to make sure you do is to name your project. As you can see, a default name has been provided called Windows Application 1. Here you should give a meaningful name to your project that is descriptive of its purpose. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'll simply will call this Sample. And I'll click OK. After a few seconds, the Visual Basic environment will open up. There's not a lot to see. There is simply a blank form with some tabs and menu items along the top. One of the first things you will want to do is to organize your Visual Basic environment by opening three windows. One window is already open, that is the Form window. If you click on View and then choose Properties window, that will create a window to the right, which will list all the properties, in this case for the form. We will introduce controls soon, and then you will see the properties will be associated with various controls as well. Going back to the View menu and choosing the Toolbox item, this will provide on the left-hand side a window which is the Toolbox. You will probably want to make this permanent, that is, so it doesn't use the auto hide feature. That is, that you will press the auto hide pincushion so that it remains on the screen. Be aware that all of these windows within the Visual Basic environment can be resized as needed. You'll also notice in the toolbox that there are many items that can be expanded. We will discuss these in detail as this lesson progresses, but for right now, just recognize that you can, in fact, see lots of other controls underneath, for example, the common controls. But again, we'll talk more about that later. Notice also there's a series of tabs in the middle of the screen, which allows you, if necessary, to jump back to the Start page, which is the Visual Studio 2008 page. And if necessary, you can go back there and then come back to your Visual Basic environment by clicking the Form1.vb tab. As our programs get complex, you'll notice there will be many tabs up here that will allow you to very easily jump from one window to the next. So for now, remember, under View, you can select Properties window, you can select Toolbox, and you can also click Designer, which in essence is the Form window itself. In another movie, we will begin to discuss placing controls on the form and saving and running your projects.